Hey members, thank you so much for your support. It means the world to me. Before we get started on the tutorial, I just want to give you two reminders. The first one is that your clay is best used within 3 to 6 months of receiving it. Otherwise, it might start to dry out. So if you haven't gotten your hands into your first box, go ahead, get your hands dirty. If you're worried you're gonna mess up, you can always shoot me an email. You can always make your creation back into a ball of mud and then start all over again. It's really a art that is flexible and lets you experiment, and there's no perfection in ceramics or anything, so create whatever you want. Don't worry about how it looks, just enjoy the process. And the other reminder is that pottery is a slow craft, so during the tutorial you'll see me going pretty fast because I sped up the video, and I also don't insert the breaks that I take. So I actually took about 3 breaks during the process, and you don't need to feel like you have to do all of your pottery in one sitting. You can always cover it up to let it sit and come back to it a couple days later just by covering it with the plastic, or there are different steps you might want to do at different times. For example, you might want to attach a handle when the clay has dried out a bit. If your clay is really squishy and kind of tacky, then you might want to wait to attach your handle or your feet. And same thing if you're going to carve any lines in. So you have a little wire tool, and I'll show that during the tutorial, that you can carve into your clay with, and that works a lot better when your clay has sat out for a few hours or maybe even overnight if you are working on it kind of late at night. So remember that you don't have to do all of your pottery in one sitting. Some things are easier to do after the clay has had a little bit of time to harden, and some things are easier to do when the clay is wet. So treat it as an experiment, no right or wrong, and let's get to the tutorial.
First, give your nails a trim if they're long, and then take your rings off so they don't make any indents in the clay. Place them off to the side, and then grab yourself a little water in case your clay feels dry, you get cracks. And then take a tennis ball sized piece of clay and toss it between your hands until a ball is formed. If you see some cracks, use some water and your fingers to smooth them out. The smoother the ball is, the easier it will be to make a smooth pot. Then stick your thumb in to the ball of clay, and holding it in your other hand, slowly begin to pinch your way around the pot. I like to rotate it counterclockwise. If you're wondering how far you should push your thumb into the clay, I like to push it in until I feel pressure in the palm of the hand that's holding the ball of clay. And you'll see I have my fingers all together and my thumb inside the pot and the other 4 fingers outside. Some people like to do it with their thumb on the outside. You can try it either way. Both ways work. If you find your rim is starting to crack a little bit, you might use some water and your finger to gently smooth the cracks away and compress the rim. You can also do the same on the outside of your pot if you see any cracks forming. And remember to take your time with the pinching process. Sometimes when we go too fast with pinching, it ends up more like a bowl in a pot, so it's wider than we want it to be. It helps if you have equal pressure inside and outside the pot when you're pinching. And you'll see I'm smoothing the inside of the pot now with my thumb. One thing I like to do when I am making pinch pots in particular is to close my eyes and not look at the pot, but instead feel how the pot feels in my hands, or notice how the pot feels in my hands. If one place feels thicker than the other, I might apply a little bit more pressure to thin it out. I find that when I close my eyes, it's sometimes easier to figure out where on the pot needs to be worked on. Instead of looking at it visually, it can be hard to tell, oh, this place is thicker than this spot and I need to thin a particular spot out. So maybe try closing your eyes, use it as a meditative moment, and simply just feel what it is like to move the clay around in your hand. Notice where it feels thicker or thinner. You'll see now I'm using my thumb on the outside, attempting to get rid of some of the fingerprints, and I'll show you another trick later on in the video that enables you to get rid of some of the fingerprints easily. I like fingerprints on my pinch pots. It shows that it's a unique work that was made by me and it will be one of a kind, but sometimes we want things to be a little bit smoother, and there's a way to do that. It requires some patience, but after waiting a couple hours for your clay to dry out, it becomes a little bit easier to remove the fingerprints. So you want to let your pot sit for about 1 to 4 hours to harden a bit, and then you'll take it and place it on its side on a flat surface. You'll put your fingers of one hand inside. You can use 4 fingers, 1 finger, 2 fingers, as you'll see I demonstrate throughout this. The thumb of the other hand inside, so you can rotate the pot, and then your other 4 fingers outside. And basically what this is doing is helping to smooth away the finger marks from the pinch pot. It will make the outside smoother. It can be helpful if you want to paint the outside to have it a bit smoother. And then you'll see I'm picking up the pot intermittently to see what spots are thicker. This happens because when we did the pinching, it wasn't exactly even. So sometimes when we're doing this part to smooth it, you'll miss spots because they're kind of higher than the spots on its sides, and you just need to apply a little bit more pressure. The clay is really malleable, but you need to be firm and also gentle at the same time while doing this step. So you can see this is smoothed the fingerprints out a lot. Now time to make a coil for your foot. Grab about a golf ball size piece of clay and then squeeze it between your hands until it forms a log shape. And then you'll roll the clay on a flat surface with both your hands. I like to spread my fingers out to do this, and you want to make sure you're applying even pressure as you go. So after you've rolled your coil, you'll want to score, so crosshatch marks onto. You'll see I already actually did it here, but I'll demonstrate again for you to see. Make crisscross lines, add some water, and then make crisscross lines again. Measure your coil for your foot, and then use your pointy tool or a knife to cut it to size. You'll also score, so crosshatch marks into, and then add water to your coil. This basically creates something called slip, which is essentially clay glue, to attach the foot, or if you were doing a mug, a handle, to the other piece of clay. So you'll place the scored sides together. Might have to cut it a little bit more. And then you'll also want to smooth together the end after you score it. You'll see I forgot and then opened it back up. So I add a little water. And then I'll put them together at the ends. And use my fingers to smooth the seam away until you wouldn't be able to tell really where it was. Then I continue to use my fingers to smooth the seams of the coil into the main body of the pinch pot. You can also use the kind of rounded edge of the pointy tool to do this. It works really well if your finger can't get in there or if you have longer nails. I mentioned cutting your nails at the beginning, and this is because it makes marks if you have really long nails in the clay. One thing you can do if you are attached to having long nails and also want to do pottery is just use your sponge to get rid of any nail marks. That's the best way to do it. It's not a big deal, but it is best if you give them a trim to start. You'll definitely find it's easier. And then the rings, if you keep rings on when you're pinching, and they make marks on the clay. So you'll see I'm adding a little bit of water and smoothing the coil on. And then I use that to define the foot a little bit. And then I'll use the same rounded end of the tool to gently attach the coil on the outside. Grab your underglaze for your ceramic clay or paint for your air dry clay. The bag your clay came in, and then put your pot on it. It helps rotate the pot around without getting your fingers on the paint. You can paint ceramic clay when it's wet, but your air dry clay must be completely dried, which will take up to 72 hours depending on how thick of a piece you made and what the temperature is like and where you're storing the clay. Ceramic clay, you can wait until it's completely dried to paint it. You can also have it fired once and then paint it. Ceramic clay gets fired twice to make it its permanent state, to basically transform the clay into a ceramic piece. Now grab your ribbon tool, it's the one with the wire pieces on the end, and you can carve to your heart's content into your ceramic piece. If you have an air dry clay piece, you won't be following along with this part of the tutorial because, as I mentioned, your clay must be completely dried before you paint it. So you can't then carve into dried clay. It's not a good idea, even if you're able to, because clay, once it's hardened, if you kind of carve into it or sand it, it creates dust, and it's not good to breathe that dust in at all. So there we go. Final product before it goes into the kiln for firing.